Good evening, everyone. This is Ohio Dan with another MGTOW video. In this video, I wanted to expand on the ideas that we've seen from several different creators, honestly, such as Sandman and Turd Flinging Monkey, and a few others, or actually several others. Most MGTOW commentators have given their take on this in one form or another, but just the idea that I'm talking about here, that women don't love the same as men, that women can never really love you, that it's all based on, what you provide, based on, with the kind of groundwork of Brefolt's law, saying that, it's the woman that determines what's necessary for a relationship, and it's based on her self-interest, and you as a man are seen as disposable and all that kind of stuff. So I wanted to go into some more detail from what I've seen from other creators about women never loving you, to talk about what I'm going to discuss here as love transference theory, or as I'm also calling it, love is love until she loves someone else. And that's a little bit of a jab on the idea of modern marriage today just being about love. Love is love, and two people who love each other should be together and all that. I think many of us within the community can see that that's really a ridiculous argument, especially when you look at how men love differently from women, and how, this whole idea that love is love really just throws that under the table in favor of just immediate feelings, and general emotion, rather than looking at what's actually a good deal, or what actually makes sense, I should say, in a marriage or a long-term relationship. So love is love until she loves someone else. What I'm going to go into detail here is going to involve, the differences between men and women as far as their reproductive strategies, the social implications of those differences, and just where we are, especially as men today, when it comes to relationships with women, and in particular, the danger of making certain choices. And where I agree and where I'd like to add to the idea that's already been presented, that either women don't love, or they love men differently, and so forth. So the first thing I want to talk about, or the first thing I want to mention as a point, is something that I'm going to mention in a lot of my videos, and that is that men and women are different from one another. Men and women love differently, and that's the first problem with the whole love is love doctrine, is that men and women actually aren't the same. And so they love, their strategies as far as why they get into relationships, what they're looking for in a relationship, the roles that they play, whether our society wants to say that men and women are the same and play the same roles or not. The reality is that men and women do look for different things. And just in general, men and women have developed to be totally different from one another in terms of just so many different things, but in particular here in terms of what they look for in a partner. So if you can't accept that men and women are different from one another, the rest of this isn't going to follow very easily. And the most important thing is to realize that men and women do have different reasons for looking for relationships. Each gender, each sex, men and women respectively, they developed in different ways to maximize their reproductive potential. And the way to do that for men is completely different than the way to do that for women. And along with this, love, actual love between men and women, is based on reproduction. It is based on, the understanding that men and women had a reason, or needed a reason, to get together. And the reason for women in many cases is resources, but the reason for men, as I'll just discuss in a second, is a little bit different and more involved than that. So without this whole need to reproduce, or desire at the very least to reproduce, so that human civilization, or beyond that, just the human species, can continue in its existence, this all exists at a neurochemical level based on what attracts us to a woman or what attracts a woman to a man. And all of these chemicals and all these feelings that we have going through us, they're based on reproduction. They're based on nature's goal of getting you together with a woman so that your genes will be carried on. Without this need to reproduce sexually, without this need for men and women to get together for there to be more people, basically, love wouldn't exist. And so love, it is an emotional experience. It is based on, things that can be considered good or healthy just in themselves. There's nothing wrong with being in love, but it's important to realize that all this is based on reproduction. All this attraction between men and women and these intimate relationships that you can have, and this idea of falling in love, this is all based on chemicals in your head. This is all based on your body, your nature telling you to have kids, basically. And so love can be complicated, but its core reason for existence, the real purpose of love is to reproduce. It's not this mystical thing. It's not something that involves finding a soulmate, which is just nonsense. And I think a lot of us have figured that out within MGTOW in general, that there's no such thing as a soulmate. There's no such thing as a woman that you have to be with. The reality is that we just have a desire to reproduce and screw, basically. And along with just the desire for sex itself, we have this desire for love, because that also goes along with the reproductive aspect of all this. So what is the male reproductive strategy? Well, it basically involves, just from a selfish standpoint, having kids with as many women as possible. Now, again, this is in a state of nature. This is not from the standpoint of what men do today. This is from the standpoint of what's actually, in a state of nature, the most reasonable strategy for men to take part in. The most reasonable strategy is get a bunch of women pregnant, some of your offspring will survive, and ultimately the next generation will have kids, or the next generation will have eventually men and women that come from your bloodline. There's no personal benefit, and I want to make a little caveat here, or a little note. I understand this is only one reproductive strategy, but for the individual man himself, there's no incentive to stay with one particular woman, when he could just have sex with as many women that are out there. Ultimately this will get his genes onto the next generation. So there's no personal benefit to the man in staying with a woman. All a man needs to do is give enough resources to a woman, give her enough time and attention to have sex with her, and then he can leave. And we see men doing this today, who are sort of members of the PUA, the pickup artist community. But even beyond that, men, it's not that men don't love women or that they don't actually want to be with a particular woman, and I'll get to this later in the video. But ultimately, men receive no benefit to themselves personally by staying with one particular woman. He can fulfill his biological needs without settling down. So all he needs to be able to do is give enough resources or attention or whatever a woman wants to knock her up. And in a state of nature, honestly, where men are physically stronger than women, you may not even need to give a woman anything. You can force her into sex. And I'm not saying this is a good thing at all. This is, I'm not saying rape is okay. But ultimately, in a state of nature, there's really nothing to prevent a man from raping a woman and getting her pregnant. So a man, really, personally speaking, has no incentive. He has no personal advantage in staying with one particular woman. Women, on the other hand, have basically the opposite strategy in mind, or the reality behind the woman's reproductive advantages. The reality behind that is basically the opposite, about considering what's advantageous for men. So while men can just have sex and maximize their reproductive potential by just having sex with as many women as they can, and there's no particular incentive for a man to stay loyal and to provide for one specific woman, a woman needs to find the man of the highest possible status. And the reason for this is that when she's pregnant, again, this is in a state of nature, and this is true today to a large extent as well. When a woman is pregnant, or when a woman, has to defend herself and come up with a way, when she needs to come up with a way to survive and essentially make sure that her children survive, she's not going to be able to do that herself. If it's just up to her and, whatever offspring she has by herself, the chances of those children, the chances of her offspring surviving are very low. So she needs to receive protection from a male partner. And what does she have in return for that? Well, she can trade her sex. She can trade her intimacy. She can be a partner, in a sense, to the guy that she wants to essentially marry her or essentially stay with her. Even though the man has no logical incentive, or no personal incentive, I should say, to do this, the woman wants to get the man to stay with her so that she will have a protector and so that she and her children will have a much better chance at surviving. In society, beyond the state of nature, men who raise their children have seen the most reproductive success. And basically, the men who just pumped and dumped throughout history in the state of nature, they didn't have as much reproductive success because their women and children didn't have a provider and protector. And men have always had to play this role. So even though men at a personal level had no incentive to stay loyal to one particular woman, men who have survived, men who are a result of the survival of the fittest, and they're a result of successful men and women, a result of successful families, basically. Most men have it within themselves, even though it's not to their personal advantage. They have this desire to take care of a particular woman. And that's where the love influence comes in. Men fall in love with women to provide an incentive for them to actually take care of the woman and make sure that she and whatever offspring that she has survives. Now, it is true that a man could, like I say, in the state of nature, just, sow his oats and reproduce with as many women as he possibly could. But the children that would be the most successful, even though men could do this, the children that would have the best chance of success would be the ones that the men actually stayed with and actually took care of. So these are two different reproductive strategies, and I'm doing my best to describe them both kind of simultaneously and in juxtaposition to one another. But, you have the strategy, I think they're called one's a K-type strategy, and the other is like an M-type strategy, and I don't remember which is which. But, you have the strategy among some animal species where just pump and dump is good enough. But to really get your species to the next level, the male of the species actually has to provide and protect. So initially in the state of nature, men could just have sex and, it didn't really matter whether their offspring survived to them because it was quantity over quality. But the best offspring, the ones that actually ended up surviving and ended up doing well and becoming, the leaders of societies, once people started to form civilizations, once human beings started to develop further as a species, most of the people in general that survived, that did well, that had success, came from families with essentially a mother and a father, where the man, even though he had no personal incentive to take care of his wife or to take care of the woman that he was with, regardless of the institution of marriage, he did it anyway because he loved her. He did it anyway because this is what biochemically he was, sort of made to do. Or not, it was a choice that men had. But men just got to a point where, even though it wasn't necessarily in their personal interest to stay with one woman, they did so anyway out of love. This is where these neurochemicals develop. This is where all this comes from. So for a man, women are actually special as individuals, because if a man didn't see a particular woman as special, he wouldn't give a shit what happened to her. He'd just have sex with her, and then it would be up to her to deal with the consequences. But because of love, because of the neurochemical responses that we have, because of the attraction that we have to women as individual women, as ends in themselves, as worthwhile in themselves, men will actually stay with particular women because there's no other logical reason. There's no, reason for men to even care what happens to a woman at an individual level once he has his way with her. It's only if he actually has love for that woman and for any kids that he may have with her that he has any reason to be loyal and to stay with her and to share his resources with her on a long-term basis. On the other hand, women who remained loyal to a specific man actually put themselves at a reproductive disadvantage. The reason for this is actually fairly clear when you look at a lot of the historical examples. Today we live in a generally safer society, at least for the time being, as long as our society continues to exist in the West. Today we have a lot more security and a lot more certainty about what the next day is going to bring for us. But throughout most of human history, as we were developing as a species, the husband could die in a war. Especially if the woman was still young and fertile at this point in time. A woman who was actually loyal to that man and couldn't bring herself to have sex with and have a family with another man, even if it was a man from a conquering tribe, even if it was a man who, just basically came in and took advantage of her situation and, was the only guy that would provide for her and take, the reins from where her husband had left off. Most of the time a woman would find it within herself to reproduce with him and have a new family. And there are many examples of this, where it's talked, you can look at World War II and the Germans that came into France and the women just willingly, reproduced with them. You can look at the story of Troy and just all that kind of stuff where women were just kind of, if their husband died, they'd go off with another male character. There are just many examples, both in literature and historically speaking, and I'm sure the same was true in Rome. I'd have to look up examples of some of this. But, it's just clear that women are willing to just forget about the guy that they were with and make a family with a new guy. And why is this the case? Like I say, women who didn't do this didn't reproduce. Women who remained loyal to their husband's memory or who didn't monkey branch when they could, if their husband got, aside from death, if their husband got sick or wounded and couldn't be a provider and protector anymore, those women either weren't going to reproduce at all, or they were going to reproduce and, have a man who wasn't a strong father figure, who couldn't take care of her, who couldn't take care of the kids and whatnot, even if it was totally not his fault that he was in that situation. You look at the average life expectancy throughout most of human history. At 30 years old, I'm probably already beyond it in some cases throughout some periods in history. But, ultimately, women who just stayed loyal to a particular man just didn't have kids as much as women who did. As much as women who would monkey branch. And so they needed to be able to transfer the love that they had for the man that they were with to whatever man they had to settle down with, to whatever man they needed to attach themselves, latch onto, so that they could have a future. Now, in general, and this may be a controversial statement that some of us will disagree with, some men who watch this will disagree with, but I'm going to assert that, especially in a state of nature, men have a greater capacity to cheat physically while still loving the relationship partner that they're with. So in other words, men see women as individuals, but a lot of the times they see sex itself as, kind of not related to the love that they feel. It's not related to whether they want to be with one particular woman or not. And this is how polygamy worked a lot of times throughout history, with the men that had enough status and had enough resources to be able to afford more than one woman. Why is it that a man would be able to give his love to several different women and take care of them and not just leave all of them? Well, it's because men, like I say, have developed and have, basically evolved to a point where we love women for who they are. We don't just kick them out on the streets. We have feelings for them if we're in a relationship of some sort with them. So, a man that's married to 3 or 4 different wives is going to see each one of those women that he's married to as being important in herself. Because again, if he can provide for all these women, if he can provide for all the children that he has with his wives, this greatly increases the chance of those children surviving. Even though he could, technically speaking, go out and just pump and dump, or what passed for pump and dump in historical times, just going out and having relations with as many women as you can. He could do all that, but the chances of those individual children surviving would be much lower than if he actually was a father to them and actually took the women into his home. So men, even in cases where men cheat physically, and I'm not justifying this at all, I'm not saying this isn't a deal breaker in relationships today. It should be. If a man or if anybody's cheating on you, that's pretty much a deal breaker. That pretty much ends the relationship in most cases. And I understand that. But men have it within them to cheat physically, but still take care of the individual women that they're actually in love with. And, a man has it within him, if he has the resources, to have multiple wives. Having one wife is too many wives today. One wife is one too many. But, if you were a man of resources and you lived in a society in which your authority as a man was actually accepted, you could love all the women that you're married to as individual people. Women, on the other hand, have no such reason to actually see the men that they're with as individuals. The purpose of women, or the purpose for women in reproduction, is to find a man that has resources and make sure that he takes care of her. So ultimately, while men probably have a greater capacity to cheat physically in a state of nature, to sow their wild oats, and to they may fall in love with a particular woman, but his loyalty, or even though his loyalty is there, his monogamy is not necessarily a natural thing. His monogamy is basically something that it's not going to exist in itself. Men are going to have the desire to have sex with multiple women who they don't love, while at the same time men have a desire to take care of certain women who are important to them. On the other hand, like I say, women, they have no such function. They have no such incentive. So women have a tendency not to cheat sexually necessarily, but to just give their love to another man. Or it does involve cheating sexually, but it's not strictly a physical thing. It's a matter of monkey branching. It's a matter of basically looking at the situation subconsciously and saying, my man's not alpha enough. I found this other guy, and I'm going to transfer my love to him. So the reality for men is that cheating on your spouse or cheating on a woman in a long-term relationship with that you're in a long-term relationship with is severely punished. If you're married to a woman and you cheat on her and she divorces you, she's going to destroy your life in many cases. If you cheat on a woman that you're in a long-term relationship with, this is also socially unacceptable. If you want to keep a woman as your girlfriend, as any sort of substantial relationship partner, you can't just cheat on her. There are actual consequences. And it may cause her to do any number of wild things to you that can result in you being jailed or killed or anything else. And frankly, society doesn't care. Society will say that he deserved it and he had it coming. Women, on the other hand, who monkey branch and engage in their hypergamy and just do whatever they want with men and only see men as a material asset, only see men as, disposable utilities that they can do whatever they want with, and not as individual people who deserve respect and deserve to be treated well as ends in themselves. Women in the society that we have today are totally out of control. And they're out of control in the sense that as soon as they're not feeling a relationship, as soon as they no longer care about you or have a reason to stay with you, they're just going to fall out of what they call love with you, and they'll go off with another man in many cases. And again, this is because of the ethical, social, and legal norms that we have today. So not only do women have it within them due to reproductive advantage throughout human history to transfer the love that they have for you. They don't just say, "Oh, I don't love you anymore. I don't care about you anymore." They find another man and then they take the love that they have for you and give it to him because he's more alpha. This is essentially what monkey branching is. Not only do women in a state of nature have this tendency, but it's facilitated and rewarded by society today. It's all about making women happy. It's all about love is love. So as soon as she doesn't love you anymore and she's supposedly in love with another man, that's what's going to happen. She's going to leave you. So there are a couple of sort of conclusions that I've reached through all this, and this is the reason why I call this love transference theory. One conclusion is that women are just basically never single. Women need, in a state of nature, some sort of natural protection. They need someone to take care of them, and that someone is going to be a man. Now, in our society today, we have the government and men collectively taking care of women, of course, and we have this done in a very gynocentric way that that's unfavorable to men. But aside from that, women have this natural desire to always be with a man who will take care of them, to always be with a man who she feels like she can reproduce with and have an advantage with, as far as being able to ensure that her children will survive and grow and thrive in the environment. So women pretty much never are actually single because it wouldn't make sense as far as their biological imperative is concerned. She's not going to be able to reproduce if she's not in a relationship with a man who's taking care of her. She's not going to be able to do so successfully anyway. That being said, men don't have any such tendency. Men love women because that's the facilitator. That is the element that gets men to actually settle down with women. Even though there's no personal advantage whatsoever, male nature is geared toward loving individual women as ends and as beings for their own sake. So when you have a society that says, okay, men don't cheat, that resolves that problem for women. Men are not going to just take care of one woman and have sex on the side with other women that they don't really care about. So that is a negative aspect as far as I'm concerned of male nature, is that unfettered, men would go out and they would have sex with a bunch of women, but would also settle down with the women that they loved, that they fell in love with at a neurochemical level, so that the kids that they actually cared about would have a really good chance at surviving, and the kids they didn't really care about and the women that they didn't really care about, they may survive or they may not. Women, on the other hand, they have no tendency to be single. They have no incentive to just actually see one man as worthwhile in himself. Because, like I say, if throughout human history women did this and they said, no, my husband's poor, my husband's sick, my husband died, but I love my husband and I'm not going to cheat on him or I'm not going to move on from him. Not that there's necessarily anything immoral in itself about moving on, but, when it's taken to the level that it is now, which is women can just say for any reason or for basically no reason whatsoever that, hey, you're not alpha enough. I'm going to go off with some other guy who wants me more or who can do more for me. When you have female nature combining with these social factors, you get women leaving men for anything, for any reason. Oh, you didn't put me on a pedestal, or you failed my shit test, or this other guy makes more money than you, or whatever the case may be. And it's even to a point where women will just have different men sort of in, as beta orbiters doing things for her, and they sort of have their own harem of sorts. And I can't remember where I saw a video on that, but that's something that's been covered as well, is that it's gotten to a point where women will not even be loyal to one man even for a period of time. So from a reproductive standpoint, it was probably healthy, even if it might have been unethical or wrong in another sense, for women to go off with another man when it was necessary to do so. This was actually a positive thing at one point in our evolution or in our development as a species. But now, when you combine women and their tendency to monkey branch with a society that encourages them to do so for any reason, it has become a very toxic, very cancerous thing for our society in the West. So that's one point that I want to draw from all this, is that it makes sense. I don't think that women are evil. It makes sense that women evolved this way to be able to move on and take the love that they feel for one man and give it to another man. It makes sense that, men, on the other hand, loved women in themselves, not as utilities. Even if, like I say, they might have sex with other women they didn't care about on the side. Men have a tendency to actually love their relationship partners, where women have more of a tendency to see male partners as disposable. But now it's gotten to a point, due to gynocentrism, due to our feminist culture, where ultimately just women will leave you as a man and monkey branch for any or no real reason other than she thinks that the grass is greener on the other side. And then some women will even come back. And it's because there aren't the social and legal and moral consequences to women doing this. So that's one point, is that when you take female nature and you apply it to how relationships work today, or how dysfunctional they are today, really, it is just a totally out of control thing with women. Women are just, they engage in monkey branching, and they're willing to transfer their love from you to another man just based on, essentially nothing. On the other hand, a second major point I think to take out of this is that, you as a man are facing a very dangerous situation when you put your future in the hands of a woman. Because if you write women off and you say that they're just evil, and you don't try to understand how men and women love differently, yes, you can say that women don't really love men in the sense that it's conditional, and men's love toward individual women is usually unconditional. But women only love you on the condition that you provide for them. But again, it's not a matter of saying that women are evil, because, like I said, this actually made sense throughout most of human history. When women were in control, that they could find another husband, or, if their partner got sick or injured or put in prison or whatever the case may be, even then it makes sense from a reproductive standpoint to find another man. It makes sense for women to be able to transfer their love from one man to another for the sake of the human species. However, when you just label women as evil, you don't really understand this. And as soon as you meet one girl who actually was raised to respect men somewhat, and I know this is rare, I know that this is, just like maybe 5% of or less of all women in the West. But as soon as you find a woman who isn't evil and is actually a decent person, and may actually have some good qualities, you're going to be faced with a lot of cognitive dissonance if you don't understand that men and women love differently. If you don't understand that even a good woman in today's society is very dangerous for you, because you can be convinced that she's in the wall. You can be convinced that, you know, she's going to make you happy, and you may just go back to living a blue pill kind of life, or you may go back to having a blue pill mentality toward women. And then all of a sudden, she's just going to leave you and monkey branch to another guy that does more for her for whatever reason, who she sees as more alpha for whatever reason. And ultimately, you're going to be sitting there miserable and probably going back through the red pill rage stage and kind of being back where you first started. So I think it makes a lot more sense to say, no, women aren't evil. Let's look at this for what it is. Women have just developed differently than men. And yes, in a sense, they don't love you. She can't love you the same way that you as a man can love a woman. But it's not that the emotions are fake. It's not that there's no affection that a woman can have for you. I mean, I know with my ex-girlfriend that she wasn't that good of a liar, that she actually wanted to be with me while we were together, that she meant everything that she said about her feelings, that it wasn't just a manipulation tactic. But she left me anyway. Or I actually broke up with her the last time because I got tired of fighting. And within a month, she was with another guy. Or within 5 or 6 weeks anyway, to be fair. And this had happened before, over and over again. It's like when we were together, it felt like everything was great. And she's not, quite frankly, she's not intelligent enough to be that manipulative. Like, I know that she meant what she said, but at the end of the day, it didn't matter because her female instincts, along with the social norms of not having to respect men, of just being able to blame men for all your problems, and perhaps most importantly, the lack of responsibility that women have today. Women are taught that they don't need to take responsibility for anything. This permits women, this facilitates women just going off with other men once they've found a bigger, better deal, as a lot of us call it. So, it used to be that even though women have always had these instincts, it wasn't so much about a bigger, better deal as my husband's dead, or I don't know where my husband is, he's captured by the enemy, or, there had been some sort of major power struggle, and as a result, I need to find a new man. Women developed to be able to accomplish this by taking the love that she had for the man she was with and just assigning it to another alpha male, or whatever other male was the best available catch for her. But now it's totally out of control because we're in a different place as far as our society and our environment is concerned, and because that society just encourages women to basically act like shit. So, of course my ex monkey branched to another man, and she did this multiple times, and I was foolish enough to go along with it, or to, take her back later, basically. But ultimately, if you just have the attitude that women are evil, if you just have the attitude that women can't love at all, then it's going to come out of left field when a woman does actually care about you. You just have to know what that means if it happens. Unless you're totally MGTOW monk and you can just say, I'm never going to have anything to do with women. And that's fair enough. You're going to be presented with some affection from a woman. You're going to be presented with a woman who you can see at some level actually cares about you or actually has feelings for you. But that doesn't make her any different than any other woman as far as her instincts are concerned, and as far as what society will let her get away with, and the lack of respect that she has for men, and so forth. So, again, the reality for men is that women can love, but they don't love you unconditionally, and our society encourages them to leave you and monkey branch to another guy whenever things don't work out. So ultimately, you as a man need to be aware of this, and it's okay to care about a particular woman. It's okay to fall in love. There's nothing you can do as a man to really stop that necessarily. Unless you're just a total monk, and that's fair enough. But for most men, even red pill men, you know, you're probably going to date or have relationships with women, and that's okay. But you need to realize that you cannot depend on her with your future, and you cannot just say that, oh, she's in the wall or she's a unicorn. We hear a lot of this nonsense. It kind of pisses me off at this point, because men should know better than to think that there's such a thing as a Nawal or a unicorn at this point, if you've taken the red pill and whatnot. But, maybe these are actually decent women. And I think that's what we should call them rather than Nawals or unicorns. But they're still women. They're still it's still within them to monkey branch to another man and to just forget about you and to take the love that they have for you and to transfer it to another man in another relationship. And society facilitates this. Society will encourage her to do this. And so you as a man need to take the necessary precautions